All right, artists, so we are ready to start painting our watercolor chart, which is going to help us for painting any of the stuff that we're going to do that involves watercolor. So for this, you're going to need this chart that you guys have already drawn out. It's already labeled with all our vocabulary. You're going to need a jar with some clean water. This can be found under the sink. All right, the jars are under there. You can get the water from there. You'll need some paper towel. I've got a little bit extra here because I'm going to be using it to clean my palette every now and then. You'll need 1 to 2 brushes. I would say at least a medium size brush, which is about this big. Not super huge, not too small. You're going to need a scrap piece of paper. All right, we've got those up in the front of the room. And then you're going to have your watercolor palette. Make sure that you are taking the one that has your name on it. I am Miss Chisholm, so I have the Chisholm's watercolor palette. Yours are all labeled with your names, okay? And we're going to do a quick tour of all the colors. So they might be a little reversed, but they're all in the same order, and I set them up this way specifically because it is going to be helpful to you when you are trying to figure out which colors you need to use to mix certain other colors, okay? So starting with black, we have cool blue, we have warm blue, we have 1, 2, 3 yellow, we have a warm red, and we have a cool red. I say this because a lot of people say, oh, I'm going to use purple, I'm going to use orange. There's no purple on this palette. There's no orange on this palette. There's no pink on this palette. This is what's called a mixing palette. And as we start to get into the painting and doing specific colors, I'm going to explain that a little bit more. All right, and you can see how I have myself set up. I am right-handed, so I have everything sort of set up for my right hand so that it's easy for me to go from my water to my palette to the individual watercolors, back to my palette, and then to my paper. You don't want to have to be crossing over a whole bunch of times in the case that something drips and then it gets onto your paper in a spot that you don't want it. So if you are left-handed, you would set this up kind of the opposite way, so everything is closer to your left hand so you'd be able to paint. So first things first, we have watercolors, and that involves using a bunch of water. So all I'm going to do to start is I'm going to take my brush and I'm just going to kind of put some drops of water onto my palette. I'll probably do this like 4 or 5 times. So I've got kind of a little puddle of water on there. You can kind of see that in the camera. You don't need to dump it on here. That's just gonna take you a lot more time to have to mix your colors, okay? So we're gonna start with the easiest one. We're not gonna mix anything together quite yet. And the easiest color for us to start with is yellow, which is at the very top of our color chart. So because we have 3 yellows, 2 of them are gonna be used for mixing. So I'm gonna go with the middle one, and we're gonna try and keep this middle yellow as clean as we possibly can. So I'm only going to use this specific pan of yellow when I'm using just yellow. And you can see I kind of took my wet brush and I rolled it around in the watercolor. Don't just take water and put it in each one. It's going to do some weird things to the watercolor, and then it's never going to sort of dry back out, and it's going to cause some problems later on. So I kind of went back in a couple of times, and I'm really trying to just kind of pick up some of that pigment and then mix it into that pile of water. So you can see I've got quite a bit here. And the more water you have, the lighter that color is going to be. It's not going to be quite as intense. So I'm going to test this. That's the only way I'm going to really know what this looks like, because it can be a little tricky. The water can look like it's a little bit bright. It can look like it's a little bit dark. But then when you go to paint it, it's not what you were expecting. So I'm just going to paint a little swatch onto my test sheet here, my little scrap piece of paper. And that looks pretty bright. It's not too light, and it definitely screams yellow. So I know that I'm ready. If it was too light, I would put a little bit more of my pigment, mix it in, test it again, just to be sure that it is the correct sort of brightness that I want. So I'm going to take my brush, and in our yellow spot at the very top, I'm going to paint in that part that says yellow. And I'm going to do this a little bit quickly. I would prefer that you take your time, try to keep your edges a little bit neat, kind of get used to how the paint sort of reacts on the paper. You can always pause this video, slow it down, whatever you need to do so that it works for you, okay? While I have this color mixed, I'm going to paint some of my vocabulary in, and we're going to look for anything that's just yellow. So if we're looking on the lower part of our chart here, I've got just yellow under my primary color. So I'm going to take my brush, I'm going to paint right on top of my vocab. So there's my yellow for my primary, okay? Yellow is also going to be found under my warm colors. And remember, this isn't yellow, orange. It's not even yellow green because that's a different color. We're looking for just yellow. And then there's one more spot in this area. Under complements, I also have yellow. And there's one more place we're going to paint this on our color wheel, and that is in yellow's complement. So when we were talking about this, we have them listed here next to each other. That's a color that makes another color stand out, and they're directly across from each other on the color wheel. So right here, yellow, it says its complement is purple. Purple is directly across from yellow. So in the very center space that you created, we are going to paint yellow, but in the purple section. Okay, you can see that pretty clearly from what I'm painting here. All right, and that has covered all of my just solid yellow sort of vocabulary and where things need to go. And if you're wondering where all of these directions were, those are all posted to Schoology in a PowerPoint that breaks down the different steps and the measurements that you need to do with a ruler on how to get to this type of a color wheel chart, right? So there's two more things I need to use yellow for, and that's making my tint and making my shade. We're going to get to some of that other stuff a little bit later, but for now, we want to take care of that tint and shade. And while I have my color mixed, I want to use it. So a lot of people get confused with what a tint is. Whenever I ask a student in a group like this, and I say, oh, if I'm tinting a color, am I making it lighter or darker? 90% of the students are going to say that I'm making the color darker. And they say that because they're thinking of tinted windows, which are dark. In art, when you are tinting a color, you are adding white to it. You're making it more opaque, which means you can't see through it. Very similar to what is happening with a tinted window. But in this case, since we're not mixing white into our color, our paper is already white. So how am I going to make my color yellow lighter? Well, I'm going to add some more water. But I'm going to do this in a smart way because I still need that yellow for something afterwards. So I'm going to take some clean water, right? I've rinsed my brush off. I'm going to take some clean water. I'm going to put it in a different part of my palette. And then I'm going to take my brush, I'm going to dry it off on my paper towel. This step is really important for this, for when you're doing a tint or even a shade. Because what's going to happen is if your brush is full of water and you go to grab some color that you've already mixed, you're actually diluting it even more. So not only are you diluting the color here that we've made and that we took a while to make nice and strong, you're also going to be diluting it even more here. So we're just going to make sure that that's dried off on our paper towel. And then I'm going to take about a brush full. So I just kind of scooped a little brush full, and I'm going to mix it into the water that I put in that separate area of my palette. And you'll be able to tell, you may not be able to tell too much on the camera, but it is going to look a little bit lighter. But again, I want to make sure it's lighter than what I've already painted on my paper. So I'm going to test that next to that original color swatch that I did. And it's definitely much lighter. You can tell from that on the camera. So now I'm going to paint my section in that says tint. And just to remind you, we wrote it only under our yellow heading. We wrote tint, we wrote shade, We wrote mixed comp, which is abbreviated for complementary, so mixed complementary. And then the very center is complementary. So just because it's in the yellow section does not mean that it doesn't apply to anything else. This whole ring around are going to be all of our tints. This whole ring around is going to be all of our shades, and so on and so forth. So whenever we do another color, just remember that it's going to follow a similar order. Okay? And I've got my tint on there now. Now I need to do my shade, which means I'm going to be trying to make my color darker. So to make any color darker, typically people will mix black. You can also use another color, but in this particular case for what we're doing, we're going to use black. And I'm only going to use a little bit of water on my brush. I don't want to take a ton of black. I want to take a little bit because my goal is not to make black. If we were just going to make black, I would say paint the shade black. But we're trying to make a darker version of our yellow. So I'm going to take a little bit of black and I'm going to mix it into my original color of yellow because I know that that's a nice strong yellow. It doesn't have a lot of water in it to dilute it like my tint. So I'm going to mix it in here. And when you mix this, you're going to get a little bit of a funky color. It's going to look a little kind of greenish, almost like a khaki sort of green color. And I know on the camera it just sort of looks dark, but it's definitely like this green color. And when I test it on my test sheet, you're going to see that as well. Where, see, it's kind of got that greenish look to it. And that's exactly what happens when you mix black with yellow. Can there be a little more black in it? Sure, it can go a little darker. Can there be a little more yellow in it? Sure, it could be a little bit lighter. You can get different tints and shades by the amount of pigment and water that you add to each of them. But in this case, this is a pretty decent shade, so I'm going to paint it in. You can tell it's spreading a little bit, and I am not too worried about that right now. The reason that happens is we call it painting wet on wet, which means that you've got wet paint here, and you're putting wet paint right next to it. So sometimes there's a tendency for it to bleed into the other. I'm not really worried about it. If you are and you don't want to get that effect, just give it a minute for that tint to dry and then you won't have that happen to you. And now that completes what we're going to do so far with our yellow. And now I'm going to move into doing another primary color. We've still got red and we still have blue. So I'm going to start with red because a lot of people really like red. I know a lot of people also really like blue. But I want you to be able to see what happens here because we've got two of each of those colors. I've got two different reds here. I've got warm and cool. And I've got two different blues here. I've got warm and cool. How do I know which one I'm going to use? And that's a good question. And it's kind of a trick question because if this is a warm red, it's not actually just red. If this is a cool red, it's not actually just red. So what we need to do is mix the two together. And that's going to give us what I like to call a true red. So as you can see, I've already started putting a little bit of water onto my palette. And I'm going to start by picking up some of that pigment, just like I did with my yellow. Okay, we're going to do this one color at a time. And it doesn't really matter which color you start with. You could start with either one. The effect is going to be exactly the same. So I'm going to start with this warmer red. I'm going to try and get a good amount of pigment on there. Again, I want to try and mix up this very strong sort of color if I can. And then before I go to grab my cool red, I'm going to rinse my brush off first. It's really important that you rinse your brush off in between colors so that you are not cross-contaminating your colors. All right, so I'm going now into my cooler red. As you can see, it's getting a little down there. And so if you end up running out of watercolor, just make sure that you ask me and just say, hey, you know, I'm running low on this color, and I'll come over and check. Because if there's some in there, I'm going to tell you to use it up. But if you're running out, I will definitely give you a brand new pan of that specific color. So I've picked up a bunch of my cool red at this point, and now I'm just going to mix that into my warm red. And you'll be able to see there's definitely a change in that color. How do I know if it is correct? Well, just like with my yellow, I'm going to test. And what I like to do is actually hold that test in between the two colors. And I know it's a little difficult to see on the camera. The color is not 100% on there, but I can see it definitely doesn't look orangey like my warm red, and it definitely looks a lot warmer than my cool red. So it's a really good in-between version of those two reds together. So now, just like with the yellow, I'm going to paint everything that is red on my color wheel. So I'm painting red right here in this spot. And again, I'm going pretty quickly just because I want to get this video rocking and rolling. I don't really want to spend a ton of time. I could be much neater. I want you to be much neater than what I'm doing. So I've got my red there. I know I have red under primary since we already talked about that, so I'm going to paint that in red. I know I have red under my warm colors, so I'm going to paint that in as well. And then I also have red under complementary colors. And just like before, I'm going to take a look, and red's complement is green. Green is directly across from red on that color wheel. So in that little piece I've got here in my green section, just double check, make sure you're in the correct section. I'm going to paint that as well. Because later when this is filled out and you're trying to say, oh, what is red's complement again? And when you look, you're going to see, oh, it's right there. It's right in that same little pie slice that we have for our color chart. And now I'm going to do the exact same thing I did for my yellow. I'm going to create a tint that's going to go right next to my red, and then I'm going to create a shade. And I still have a little bit of room on my palette. I left a bit of space there, and I'm just going to put some water in that section, some clean-ish water. It's getting a little murky because I keep rinsing my brush off. So I put that water in there. I'm drying my brush off now, just like before. I'm going to take a scoop of that red and mix it into that clean water. And I see it change color, but of course I'm still going to test it. I want to make sure that it's lighter than the previous color swatch that I painted, and it is. It's looking very pink, which is what it should look like. And then I'm going to paint in my tint section. And try and leave just a little space. Since I'm painting very quickly this morning, maybe it's afternoon when you're watching this, I don't know. And try not to let it bleed too much. All right, so I've got my tint on there, and then just like before, take a little bit of water, pick up a little bit of that black, and I'm going to mix it into that original red that I made. And it looks pretty dark on the screen. It's going to turn almost like this purplish, like a dark maroon sort of color. And then I'm going to paint that swatch, and oh, that's a really nice shade of red. And then I'm going to paint in my shade section under my red piece on the color wheel. And again, I'm kind of expecting you guys to take more time with this. I'm going pretty fast just because, again, I'm trying to do this video and I don't want it to take forever. So you can get your colors much closer and neater. But for me, I'm just going to kind of do it quickly so we can kind of move on. So now I'm ready to make another color, but I've kind of used up everything on my palette. So instead of having to get up, go over to the sink, rinse the whole palette out and things of that nature, all I'm going to do is take some of the extra paper towel that I grabbed, and I'm just going to wipe up all of that watercolor that's on my palette. And you really want to just make sure that if you're doing it in this method, that you're getting all the color out of those areas of the palette. All right, because if you do not, what's going to happen is it's going to contaminate the next color that you mix. Right? So if there's any traces of color left on here, if you go to mix, say I go to mix yellow here and I still had some of my red, it's going to look weird. It's not going to be yellow. It's going to turn a different color. And sometimes this particular cool red will stain the palette a little bit. That's okay. You just got to make sure it's dry. If it's dry, it's not going to hurt anything. All right, so now we're going to mix our last primary color, which is blue. And we're going to treat it the same way we did with our red. So we had to mix these two together to get a true red. We've got our cool blue, we've got our warm blue. We're going to do the same exact thing. We're going to mix both of those blues together to get ourselves what we're going to call a true blue. So I've got my water on the palette, and I'm going to take one color at a time. So I'm going to start with my warmer blue, which is that lighter one next to the yellow. Again, it doesn't really matter which one you start with. I just like starting with the lighter colors because sometimes it makes for more of a dramatic change, and sometimes I like a little drama. All right, so I've got my first color on there. I'm going to rinse my brush off. Now, my other blue is a little bit wet. It's wet from a different class. So I'm not going to make, that's how you saw me dry my brush off in between. If it's dry and you haven't used it yet today, definitely wet your brush so you can pick up that color. But I know I'm already picking up a ton of color because it's already wet. So I'm just going to go ahead and mix that into the blue I already put down there. And you can see it changed that blue. And I want to make sure that it's a blue that's in between those two. So here's my tester sheet again. Test that swatch of blue. And again, I'm holding it in between. It's definitely darker than my lighter blue. It's definitely lighter than my darker blue. So this is going to be the blue that I use for all of my blue things that I'm now going to paint. And again, we've got blue here. We've got blue under our primary colors. We've got blue under our cool colors. We're going to switch over to cool colors. And then blue also has a complement. And if we take a look at our complementary colors here, I'm going to paint that in really quick. Blue's complement is orange. So I'm going to take a quick look over at my orange slice over here. And I'm going to say, all right, where's the middle of my orange slice? And I'm going to paint blue in that section as well. And there I have all my blue. I've got some darker areas starting to puddle here. If you dry your brush off a little bit, you can kind of pick up those puddles a little bit, and your color will dry a little more evenly as we move forward. And now I'm just going to kind of like buzz ahead a little bit. I'm going to do my tint and my shade really quick, and then I'm going to take this chance after that to clean my water. You can see it's pretty dark. And as we start to mix our secondary colors, which some of them are going to be brighter, we want to make sure that our water isn't always dirty. The dirtier your water gets, the more it's going to start to affect your colors. So take an opportunity, pause the video if you need to, if your water starts to get really, really gross and dirty. Take a pause, go grab some fresh water, rinse out the cup, and you can pick up where we leave off. All right, so we have now got our 3 primary colors on there, and we're going to start mixing our secondary colors. All right, so our secondary colors are orange, green, and purple. So we have 2 blues, and we have 2 reds. The question is, and this is a question I get all the time, how do we know which one we use to make which colors? We're not going to use both of them together. The only time you mix both of these together is when you want that plain blue, or you mix them together to get that plain red. But because this is a mixing palette, and you've got the warm red and the cool red, and you've got the warm blue and the cool blue, I set these palettes up specifically so you could kind of get a hint as to what colors we're going to use to make other colors. So if we look at our color chart and we have yellow and we have blue, you mix them together and we're going to get green. So the way I set the palette up is yellow is always next to the color that you're going to mix it with to get that other color. So you've got yellow in the middle here, you've got yellow next to this blue, you've got yellow next to this red. That should be your hint that that's what you mix together to get your orange. This is what you mix together to get your green. We'll talk about purple in just a minute. So, and that's why we have these extra yellow pans, because if you slightly cross-contaminate it, so if I accidentally get a little bit of blue in here, you can see on my palette here, it's a little green because the 2 colors have kind of already mixed together. And it's okay because you're only using this one for green. You're only going to use this one for making your oranges. So, you know, just if you keep things clean and you kind of, you know, manage your palette well, you'll be able to continue using it for a while. I've been using this palette for a very long time. And it stayed pretty much the same way until I have to change the colors out when they run out. All right, so I've got my yellow on my palette with some water. I'm gonna rinse my brush out. I'm gonna dry it off just a little bit because my palette is still wet from mixing my other colors. And I'm gonna take a little bit of this blue, the blue that is right next to my yellow, that's the warmer blue. And then I'm just gonna mix the 2 together. And just like that, we've made green. So how do I know if it's the green that I want? If it's strong enough, I'm gonna test it. It's a little on the light side. So I think what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna add a little bit more of each pigment. Now again, you wanna rinse your brush in between colors. So I've already rinsed my brush off. I'm going back into my yellow, trying to pick up some of that pigment, mix it in. It's a little more yellowy. So I'm gonna rinse my brush off again. Dry it a little bit because my blue's already wet. Pick up a little bit more blue. Mix it in. And now I'm going to test that green again. And that's definitely a little bit more intense. You can kind of tell this one's a little lighter, this one's a little bit darker. So now my green, I'm going to paint all of my things green. So green goes on my color wheel in the spot that is labeled green. Green is also going to go under my secondary colors. Green is also going to be under my cool colors. And we already talked about green's complement being red, so it's going to go right here under my red complement. And then again, right in the center, directly across, that's going to be my green. So now when I look at red, instantly I say, oh, red's complementary color is green. Maybe I could use that combination somewhere. And the same thing's going to go for the red once we get the rest of this filled in. Okay, so rinsing my brush off really well, and we're going to do our tints and shades the exact same way we did them before. So I'm going to put some water in a clean area of my palette. I'm going to dry my brush off. I'm going to pick up some of that green that I already mixed. Mix it into my water. Test, test, test. It's definitely much lighter. And now that is my tint. All right. And now I'm going to go for my shade. Take a little bit of my black. Mix it into my green. That's my pure green that doesn't have any extra water in it. I can already tell it's getting darker. Test, test, test. That's a pretty good dark version of my green. So now I'm just going to paint in my shade section. So for orange, I'm going to speed the video up a little bit, and you can slow it down if you need to, but it's the same sort of thing. And I'm going to be using the red that's right next to my yellow. And then we're going to paint in all of our orange things and then do our tint and our shade. So if you need to, you can slow down this section of the video, but I'm gonna speed it up a little bit so that way we can get through this and we can talk about how we're gonna mix our color purple. All right, so you can see I've completed my orange and now I'm getting ready to do my purple section. So I sped that up because I figured if you're doing it exactly the same way, we're going to make sure that we get it done quickly and efficiently. So now we're gonna mix our purple. So the thing I always get every single time is that students wanna mix these together, or they wanna mix this with the blue to get our purple. There's two colors that we have not used to make a secondary color yet. We use these two to make our orange. We use these two to make our green. All that's left is our cool blue and our cool red. So those are the two colors we're going to use to make our purple. So just to be clear, whenever you're mixing colors from here on out, you're only ever going to be mixing two colors together until we get to our mixed complement, which I'll explain in a little bit. All right, but if you're reaching for a third color, or if you're reaching for a color that's next to another color that you're not using, you want to double check. You want to either ask me, you want to just say, well, maybe that's not what I'm supposed to be doing. I don't know. And just make sure that you are mixing the right things together. And always test. If you test it and it looks strange, that's an indicator that you maybe mixed the wrong colors together. And if you're not sure what colors to mix together, just call me over. I'm more than happy to come over and help you with that process, okay? And so now I'm going to pick up some of my cool blue to mix into that cool red, and that's going to give us our purple. I know on the camera it kind of looks like black, but when you see me do my test swatch, I have created purple. All right, so, and just like before, we're going to paint in all of our areas that are purple. We're going to paint it under our secondary colors. We're going to paint it under our cool colors. Purple is yellow's complement, so we're going to paint it in our vocab area, but then we're also going to paint it in the middle of that yellow section. And then we're also going to mix our tint and our shade. So since we're kind of repeating steps, I am going to speed up the video again. Okay, again, you can pause it, you can take your time, you can, you know, go change your water, which I will probably do at some point also, since we're going to be getting ready to mix our tertiary colors after this, which will complete most of our color wheel until we get into the mixed complement portion of it. All right, and now we are ready to start working on a tertiary color. So since I'm kind of in my my blue, purple, red, purple range, I'm working with purple. I'm gonna work on that color. So one thing we just need to remember, you know, some people ask me, they're like, well, can it be purple blue or can it be purple red? Yes, yes, it can be. I put the primary before the secondary color because that primary color is going to tell you what you need to add more of to your color. So I know that this red and this blue make my purple. So that's how I'm going to start. I'm going to make my purple again. I'd use the purple up there, but there's black in it. One of them's really watery. So I'm just going to start fresh and make my purple. And if I'm making my blue purple, there's going to be more blue in it, which means there's going to be more of my cool blue in it. So I want this to look different from the purple I've already made. So it looks still a little close to the color that I already made, so I'm going to rinse my brush off again. I'm going to add a little bit more of that cooler blue pigment to it. And then I'm going to test it, and I'm going to test it near my purple. I'm going to do a little swatch there. Oh, that's definitely a blue purple. Definitely a blue purple. So now I know I can paint in all of my blue purple areas. And I'm going to do that very quickly. So I've got blue purple here on my color wheel. Blue purple is a tertiary color. So I'm going to paint that in under my blue purple vocabulary. It's also a cool color, so I'm going to paint that in under my vocabulary. It also has a complement because there is a color that is directly across from each other from it on the color wheel. There's my blue purple, and that is yellow orange. So here is my yellow orange, and that's where I'm going to paint that colored blue purple in there. All right. And then again, I'm going to do my tint and shade the exact same way I did it before. All right, guys, so I took a quick break. I wanted to get some clean water, clean my palette, and I ended up having to get a couple of new paint pans because I was done with the ones that I had before. So I'm going to do one more tertiary color because I think it's pretty apparent as to what needs to happen to get those tertiary colors. And that way you can kind of work through it, and then we'll come back and I'll show you how to do the mixed complementary color. And then after that, the only thing we'll have left to do is the monochromatic that's going to be at the bottom. All right, so because I've got nice clean water, I'm going to start with my brighter colors at the top. So in this case, I'll just go for yellow-green. And again, you know, we're thinking about how do we mix the secondary color that's in yellow-green. So the secondary color is green. And we know that we make green by mixing yellow and then the warm blue that's right next to it. But if it's yellow-green, that means there's going to be more yellow in it. So I want to make sure that I have a lot of yellow and then not quite so much blue. Right? I want it to be more yellow than what I've already put on my paper. So I'm just going to take a little bit to start, and we're going to see what happens. I'm going to mix that up. I've got my test sheet ready to go, and I'm going to test a little swatch. And that's actually pretty darn good. You know, you can kind of tell on the paper, it doesn't look like this green here. It doesn't look like my yellow. If you painted your swatch closer to the edge, you could hold it in between, and that would kind of indicate to you if it's in between those two colors. I happen to get it on the first try. I don't always get it on the first try. Sometimes I have to add more yellow to make sure that it goes in between. And then, just like everything else, I'm going to paint all of my yellow-green items in. So I've got yellow-green on my color wheel. I've got yellow-green under my tertiary colors. Yellow-green's a little bit cooler, so that's under our cool colors. It's also got a complement because there's a color across from it, which is red-purple. So red-purple right here. I'm going to paint that with my yellow-green color. And then again, I will do my tint, I will do my shade, and then move on to the next color. So again, just to remember, when you are mixing these colors together, you're going to look at what your secondary color is. Think about the two colors you use to get that. And then if it says blue-green, I'm using more of that blue. I'm not reaching for this one. I'm still using the same blue that I used here. All right. So I'm going to take a quick break and I'll come back and we will talk about how to do our mixed complementary colors.